everybody, and welcome to the 6th edition of Joshua's Coding Hub. Today we'll be going through a wide range of topics. And to kick off today's lesson, I would just like to display the outline of the lesson on a PowerPoint. Let's take a look at the outline of today's video. This is the 6th tutorial in my series, and this is what we will be covering today. What is a data type? What is a data type in Python? Why do we use data types? Recap answers from previous class. Recap the quiz answers from my previous tutorial, what is Python. Then the body of the lesson, data types, where we dive into strings, integers, floats, and booleans. Then the quiz for today's class, the recap, which covers everything that we learned today. So as you know my outline, let's get started with today's class. Guys, the recap answer wasn't from what is Python, but it was from how to create a food guessing game, my 4th tutorial. So the answers to those questions were, for the first one, any of the 4 following: booleans, strings, integers, or float. For the second question, the answer was the input function. And the third question was RAM stands for Random Access Management and is used for the memory in a computer. Okay, so what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say data type? Well, a data type is basically one of the things that we classify something in Python. Let's say that you write a piece of code, and that piece of code has to belong to one of the data type families: the strings, integers, floats, and booleans. These may not be very familiar names for you, but I'll be explaining them. Think of a family. Each of these data types is one type of family. Then the pieces of code belong to one of these types of families. The main ones that we will be using in future codes are strings and integers, maybe floats, and when we get into the more advanced topics, we may be using a bit of booleans. So I would like to demonstrate some of the data types to you. So let's go to our Joshua Python file. We would have made our thing 4th of February, not December. 4th of February for me, whatever date you're watching this. So then go to and make a file named datatypes.py. Right click on this and press open with Notepad. Okay, so now that you know what data types are, let me give you a few examples. String. String types of data types are basically data types that have double equals. Hello. Is a string data type. Anything that has double quotations around it is basically a string data type. Okay. Strings, in my opinion, whenever I think of strings, I think of the English language. Whatever's inside the double quotations, I think it's kind of like converting it to the English language, converting it to the way that me and you speak. When you first look at a program, normally the writing inside a string is normally what humans that are new to coding can really understand. However, normally they don't understand the functions. Anything that is a string and inside the double quotations, normally your onlooker would understand that part of the code. The only part of the code is strings that they would understand. Next one is integers. Integers are basically numbers. 5 here is a number. Therefore, we classify 5 as an integer. Any type of number can be an integer. However, if it's a decimal number, that is not an integer. Decimal numbers have a whole other data type for them, floats. Float is the data type for all of the decimal numbers in Python. So far we have the string data type, the integer data type, and the float data type. Now for the last data type, Boolean. Booleans have the values true or false. These are Booleans. These types of values, true and false, are Booleans. They are set values and are useful when you're trying to ask questions to the user and give it output. We will be using Booleans in our next classes. I'm afraid I cannot show you an example of Booleans yet, as we need to do much more code for you to be able to use Booleans inside your code. Maybe in the next 2 classes, or maybe even next class, I could be able to teach you a little bit on how to implement Booleans in a code. Strings, integers, and floats, they are more likely for you to use, especially in the beginner stage, mainly leaning towards the string and integer sides. Floats, normally they're rounded off. Normally we don't like decimal numbers in Python, so not all the time we may use floats, but there are some cases that we do use floats. Okay, now if you have a notebook, please note this down and remember this, because this is very, very important. I'm deleting this now. So, if you had watched my class on variables, you would understand what I'm doing right now. So let's create a variable. Let's say string is our variable. And then set the string to Joshua. Now, let's say somebody comes along and says, how do you know that it's a string? You might be telling me that's a string, but you need to show me that Python knows that Joshua, in the double quotations, is a string. How would you show that? This is how you do it. Okay, this is the type function, is what is used to identify data types. We have to put the type function inside the print function, because the print function will actually print what is typed, what is stored in the type function. So let's test this out using command prompt. So press CD, right click and say copy address as text. Go back to command prompt, copy it here, press enter, clear the page using CLS. Then after that, do Python, the name of our file, Datatypes. Types.py. Class string. So now you can go take to that person class string. So basically, these signs are basically just something that we use, something that Python interpreter uses to classify this as a string, to give the output as a string. Class is short for classified, and string, str, inside the double quotations, inside the single quotations. Str is basically another short for string. This can happen with all of the data types actually. if I said 5 and call this integer? Remember that your variable has to be descriptive to your value, very descriptive. So now if we save that file and we come here, class as integer. int stands for integer. You can do similar things for true. Now, booleans, unlike strings, they don't need the double quotations around them. Because let me show you boolean. Let me set the value as, let me make the variable a boolean, the main boolean. Save that. And they will say class type bool. Exactly. Bool is short for boolean. But remember, when you're using a boolean, you do not put the double quotations. Because if you put the double quotations, it will be classified as a... Oh, wait, I need to say that. It will be classified as a string. Okay, now the last example is a float. Let's do 5.8. Now, I need to tell you something about variables. The names of variables cannot be keywords. So example, if I put float here right now, float is basically a keyword in Python. So Python will not understand if I set a variable of a keyword to a value. It will not allow me. So I will say float number. That. Now let's float number. Okay, Control S stands for save. Float. Okay. So now you've understood how to so please note down the type function. Now you understood how to now you've understood more about the data types. Let me do some cool stuff with you for data types. Let's say that I want to do string is 5. Now if you watch my second video, you would understand that 5, as it's in the double quotation marks, even though 5 is a number, in this case 5 is a string, as it is in the double quotation marks. But if you took the double quotation marks off, it would be an integer. Okay, so now if I did print type, it would obviously give the output as a string. Print, exactly. But this is called, what I'm about to show you is called typecasting. Typecasting is changing a value that is assigned to one data type and changing it to another data type. Let me explain. So, in this case, string is equal to 5. 5 is classified as a string. We can tell from the type. But if we typecast this using integer, this is how you typecast. int is short for integer, like we saw in command prompt. And we put the parentheses around the string. So it's saying 5 is no longer a string, we are changing it into an integer. Let's save this and let's see what the output is. String. What? Why is it a string? Well, Python interpreter says print type string. String equals 5. 5 is in the double quotations, meaning it is a string. However, it changes the double quotations of 5. It takes the double quotations away, and 5 is now an integer. But we don't tell them to print that. Only if we tell them to print it, we can see. The end product is string being an integer. However, the normal print function won't work. If you look at my code here carefully, you will see a little tweak. I've set the int string to a variable typecast, and then I print the type of that variable. The string is 5. It cannot change. Print type as string, string will always stay as 5. But if you assign this to another variable and get the type of that variable, then only you will get the output as, ta-da, integer. Okay, so if you want to watch this video again, please do, because we're going to have a recap soon. Okay, so the recap for today. First question. What is the name given to the process of changing a code belonging to one data type to another? Second question. Name me 2 types of code that can be classified as the data type of a Boolean. Last question. What must be in every single piece of code to be classified as a string? So, how do you think you did? You'll find out in my next tutorial. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for my next videos. Please like and subscribe.